What if we could help you get out of your own way, especially after adversity, for the design of your legacy? I'd like to welcome John Kippen to the Design Your Legacy podcast this lovely day. Welcome, John.
Hi, great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
It's my pleasure to host you. And I was inspired by your story, and I believe you're joining from Hollywood in Los Angeles, California, USA.
I'm actually in the Valley. I'm a Valley boy. Like, oh my God, like that'd be awesome.
Oh, okay, the San Fernando Valley. Some
Yeah,
people outside of LA may or may not be familiar with that.
right.
So, okay. Well, would you like to share an icebreaker about yourself before we jump into the first question?
Sure. Grew up in the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles. Two great parents, professional, both attorneys. Went to a nice high school and college, and started a computer consulting business right out of college. And everything was going great in a relationship. Everything was hunky dory. And then I was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And the brain tumor was manifesting itself with hearing issues and dizziness.
Were you about 25 or 35 at that time in
Yeah, I
age?
was 33.
Okay, okay, okay.
And, I couldn't deal with the dizziness anymore. I had seen doctors and they didn't know what it was. And finally, I mustered the courage to get in that tube, that MRI tube. And that was not easy.
Mhm.
But after an hour of MRI came out, and I was miserable. I remember going to the front desk, the receptionist desk, and I said, "How much for those films you just printed?" And the receptionist, "Oh, no, no, those goes to the radiologist, and then the radiologist will read them and then write a report, and then in a couple days they'll send the report to your doctor, and then your doctor will call you." I said, "No, that wasn't the answer I was looking for. How much for those films? You can always print another set for the radiologist." And she had never been asked that question. So she picked up the phone and checked with someone. She said $300. Okay, my credit card, I paid for those films. Immediately drove to my ENT's office without an appointment. Walked in. He saw me through the window, the concerned look on my face. I held up the envelope of the MRI and he said, "Come in." He put one of the pieces of film up on his light board and said, "Oh, I think I see something." And he pulled it down and put it back in the envelope and he said, "I'm going to make an appointment." And he made an appointment for me for the following day at a ear clinic downtown. And I didn't know what it meant. I just knew I was miserable. And I drove down there by myself. Note, if you ever go to a doctor and you think it's something serious, bring someone with you because you're not going to remember a word that they say when they give you the bad news. And I walked in, I'm sitting on the examining table, rustling with the tissue paper and just trying to be present and listen as he looks at the MRI and then calls a neurosurgeon in to look at the MRI and then they converse and the neurosurgeon leaves and the doctor turns around with no bedside manner and says, "John, you have a 4.5 centimeter acoustic neuroma brain tumor. It is displacing your brainstem and killing you. We have moved three other patients out from next Friday because that's when we're going to take it out. It'll be a 14-hour surgery. And you're going to go deaf in your left ear, and we're going to do everything we can to preserve facial nerve function." And he left the room. So that's kind of how my life kind of stopped in its tracks. And I spent the next I went through surgery. I remember waking up in surgical recovery after a 14-hour surgery and kind of groggy and trying to fight to the get to the surface and my dad was sitting holding my hand on the side of the bed. But I looked around and I didn't see my mom, so I asked for my glasses. And I put the glasses on, realized my head was bandaged, so that was a trick in itself of trying to get my glasses on. And I looked and I saw my mom's face. And she had this look of horror, like, what the heck did they do to my son's face? And looking back, that was the beginning of the moment where my self-confidence was eroded. If my mom didn't love my face anymore, the person who was supposed to love me unconditionally, you
You
know,
know, I don't mean to interrupt, but there was like that expression. I think I've got enough rapport. I can make this joke with that's a face only a mother could love.
Yeah,
But on
right.
bump, but on bump. It's
Well,
just a
she
joke.
didn't even love my face at that point. I mean, it was shocking. So again, that was in after many, many, many years of soul searching. Fortunately or unfortunately, I was able to work and out from home and not go out and meet people and not celebrate parties with people and not see friends. And I really went into a life of seclusion.
Yeah, one of the things that I hope you're going to speak about in a moment has to do with the internal narrative, because the number one thing that stops a person from designing their legacy is that they don't feel that they're worthy. Their answers aren't good enough, or any other limiting belief in their mind that then just has them procrastinate or never pick up the pen or be a keyboard warrior regarding making that meeting with a legacy planner, or there are even things that they could do on their own. And obviously a legacy is more than death and taxes, but I would like you to speak about that internal narrative when you have a moment. So absolutely, I would imagine that you went into shock, and then there was a seclusion phase of, how do I now interact with the world? This
Yeah, I mean, you're hiding, right?
and a
So
lot of people do that, even have
you're
perfect
not
symmetrical
even
faces.
willing to respond to it. You're not even able to think of it in those terms. You just don't do action. You don't take action. You don't do anything. You live in your comfort zone, which is now shrunken, so it's very, very narrow. And you don't want to think about what it's going to take to start living your life again or your new existence. Um, and it got to the point after almost 12 years of hiding. I said, I've had enough.
Yeah, you have to live and not just exist.
Yeah, but you can know that up here. All
Mm.
but knowing it here in your soul, in your chest, in your heart, it's a totally different story.
So I want to preface for any of the listeners that there is a silver lining in that John now can set other people free, because you've worked through this um, phase of your life. You've worked through this personal development area. I'm not sure what words you would give to it, because um, I just I think about even individuals like Angelina Jolie, and she's got like the perfect symmetry. She's been in the news recently, and yet she was an individual that cut herself, and so there's all types of insecurities, fears, demons, etc., that can cause a person to think that they can't be themselves. And I think you're at a point now, because of what you have processed, that you're just going to unabashedly be yourself. And now people are turning to you, John. How do I deal with this?
Right. Yeah. I've started a resilience and empowerment coaching program because, I studied to be a life coach. I got certified, and it was like, what is my niche? My niche is helping people be resilient.
And there's so much shame in Los Angeles of things that people say to themselves, I'm not good enough, or this is not perfect. And
I'm not pretty enough. I'm not
right.
handsome enough. I'm not skinny enough. I don't have enough hair on my top of my head. All of these is superficial things. They always say that people judge you within the first 5 seconds of meeting you. That's just human nature that they see you and they immediately form an opinion. And if there's something that is, I'm not going to say abnormal, but different,
Hmm.
they get caught up on that difference.
Yeah, although I would think that your auric energy field would speak louder than just the visual.
But
Like
that's
you would,
only after you learn how to love yourself again.
ooh, that's the tweetable X moment right there.
You know, when you learn, boy, when you learn how to love yourself despite whatever baggage you have. When I learned through performing magic for people that my face did not need to define me if I didn't let it. And I
Mm.
didn't learn that cognitively. I lived that. I believed it in my soul. That's when that aura comes out. And people all of a sudden are attracted to you. And they don't know why. Because it's certainly, I'm an overweight guy with balding hair and a paralyzed face. But they're attracted to this energy that you give off because you know who you are.
Hmm.
You go through some adversity and you get through it. All you want to do is give back to other people and help them get to the same place you are. And
Hmm.
that's what brings you joy.
Hmm.
It's not about you anymore. It's about who you are and who you show up as and who you can inspire to get out of their own way.
Yeah. So what's interesting about that is if you're no longer judging yourself, you're no longer judging them, and then they feel at peace, at ease in front of you.
Yeah, it is what it is. There are things we can change. Be
Hmm.
We can change. Mindsets, we
Hmm.
can change. But there's some things, you know, we can't change. In fact, we could go on for hours, but I had two opportunities to have plastic surgery.
Hmm.
And I saw the one of the most world-renowned plastic surgeons in Beverly Hills.
Is it Dr. 90210? Keep going. I think that's Kim Kardashian surgeon.
He's world-renowned, especially for facial reconstruction.
Okay, okay.
And I had a meeting with him, and he was very nice and cordial and professional, and I was ready to sign on the dotted line because
Hmm.
again I wanted to improve my face. I didn't think I would ever be able to smile like I used to, but I wanted symmetry at rest. That was my goal for the surgery. It was $25,000 too, and insurance didn't cover it, but I was willing to invest in myself, right? And then I got a call from his scheduling nurse, and she said, "John, I got great news." And I was like, what's that?" She said, "Well, I'm able to squeeze you in a week from Friday." And I said, "Sorry, squeeze me in?" She said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. I can squeeze you in. We got an opening a week from Friday." And I said, "Well, what time?" And she said, 4 o'clock. Morning? No, in the afternoon on a Friday before a 3-day weekend. And I'm like, I'm sorry. I don't want to be the 4 or 5 o'clock guy. I want to be the 7 o'clock guy. I want to be under surgery, which could be a 4 or 5 hour surgery. I want to be there when the doctor is bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. And she said, I don't understand. I said, what? Don't you understand? She said, I moved mountains to get you that time. And I responded, I have a quick sense of humor. I was like, then move them back. And I said, I don't want to be the 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening guy. So if you can't find me a better time, I'm not interested.
Hmm.
And then many years later, and we're going way out of order, but one of my closest computer consulting client friends became almost adopted me as Jamie Lee Curtis.
Hmm.
She was in my documentary, John's Ultimate Illusion, and so forth. And I remember sitting at her house working on her computer, and she was sitting next to me, and I had mentioned that this filmmaker wanted to do a documentary on my journey, and I was telling Jamie about that. Um, and then there was a silence, awkward silence, and all of a sudden Jamie said, "And and." I guess that was my cue to say, Jamie, will you be in my documentary, please? She said, yes. And man, she was amazing in it and really spoke from her heart about who I was and how I had overcome my adversity, and the film won 3 awards, and at the largest of the film festivals, Doc LA, she called the producer and said, "I want to give John his award."
Mm.
Showed up and gave me my award and gave a little speech, and it was just a wonderful moment.
Yeah.
We were talking earlier. Um, I live my life feeling that it's better to ask for forgiveness and permission. And I will admit it's bit me in the butt a couple times, but it's given me opportunities I would never have had if I didn't just say, "Hey, I like that idea. I'm going to go do it." And if someone wants to stop me, they got to stop me. But, I'm not going to ask for permission in fear that they're going to say, "Oh, no, you could never do that."
Well, good on you, because I think that's a part of confidence. And I also wanted to comment that I think that when somebody has to work a little harder because of something in society called pretty privilege, and let's say they don't have pretty privilege, then they have to hone and develop other aspects of themselves to connect with other people, to make themselves attractive to other people.
Yeah,
And those are the push-ups they have to do and that they are willing to do. And then one day they wake up and there's an ROI. And then the person that's 10x better looking than them goes, huh, how come that guy or gal is getting the attention or the
yeah,
opportunity or the open door?
right. It's your personality. It's how you show up. It's you're willing to fall down and get back up quickly. That's the definition of resilience, is getting back up as quickly as you can. Taking a moment to brush the dirt off your knees and elbows and then get back up and try something different. Try it again. You know,
Yes.
our, we evolve because we get up and we don't stay down.
Yes, which makes you a valuable positive role model on today's podcast episode. So let me circle back for a moment and we're
Okay.
going to talk about your TED Talk in a moment, but what I just want to agitate the problem for a little bit. And I only say the word problem because so many other people are struggling with their internal narrative. So my question to you, the first question is, what internal narrative did you have to rewrite in order to keep moving forward?
I wasn't lovable.
Mm.
I wasn't lovable. I wasn't worthy. I didn't fit in. And then that's when I kind of came to the decision that my difference, instead of hiding from it, it became my biggest strength through my story of what I went through and incorporating that with performing magic. And, I would sit down at a table and I'd have an audience there and they were distracted by my face. Not in a bad way. They were just curious. Yeah, did he have Bell's palsy? Did he have a stroke? I wonder why. And that would detract from them enjoying my performance.
Okay.
So I changed my act.
Okay.
I would start it saying, "Hi, guys. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here. A little bit about myself. My name is John, and I'm doing magic since I was a little kid. But in 2002, I had a brain tumor. But when they cut out my head to get the brain tumor, they traumatized my facial nerve, hence the paralyzed face. But something happened to me on that operating room table. I'm not sure what it was, of course, because I was unconscious. All I know is I recovered. I realized I had acquired some new skills. And then I pause and I wait for the audience to get on the edge of their seat, wanting to know what possible skills I got from having surgeons in my brain. And I look to the right and my left like it's the biggest secret. And then I lean in and I whisper in a loud voice, "Guys, I'm able to visualize people's thoughts." And then I do a piece of mentalism where I read minds. And now all of a sudden, my biggest life challenge became my superpower. And that causes people to look beyond my mask, look beyond my face and into my heart.
I think that's beautiful that you share that. And there is a power to naming something. Like, let us just get it out of the way. So here's the story, and this is how, because I know you mentioned that kids are much more honest when you're out in the public. And I was chuckling a moment ago because I was thinking that kids would probably just want to reach over and touch your face, but no adult's going to do that because of social conditioning. But yet the burning curiosity of like, well, what happened? And what do you think about it? And what is it like to exist in the world today? And like, what are you really thinking, John?
I tell the story in my TED Talk that I was in a restaurant having dinner, and this family was in the booth right in front of me, and this 5 or 6 year old kid was fidgeting, and he turned around facing me,
Mhm.
knees on the bench of the seat, and he's looking at me kind of weird. Hmm. And he was curious, so he got up, walked over, and looked up to me and said, "Mister, what's wrong with your face?" And I didn't know how to respond. I was still healing at that time.
You should have said, I didn't eat enough vegetables when I was growing up to help his mom out. Keep going. Sorry.
But I started to be honest with the guy, the little boy. And his mom came and grabbed him by the arm and said, "Don't bother the nice man. He has enough troubles already." And took her back. Well, I couldn't leave it there. So I got up, walked over to the table, got on my knees. So I was eye level with the little boy. And I said, you had a really good question. You see, I had a medical procedure that caused me not to be able to move my face. But it's my new face, and I love it because it's different. Well, it's different just like yours is different. And all of a sudden, the boy took his hands and he started distorting his face to mimic mine. And he turned to his mom and said, "Mom, look, I can do that too." No judgments, just pure honesty. And then I looked at his mom and dad's face, and they were, like, holy cow, what a lesson that this guy just taught us as a family how to treat people with respect and compassion, no matter what their issue is. You never know what someone's going through.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's one of my proudest moments of having the courage just to talk to this little boy as an adult to a young man and just tell him the way it was, but you know, framing it, framing it that I thought it was a superpower of mine. It was my best trait. It made me memorable, and what my realization really came when I was performing for a group, and there was this woman named Darren, and she was dressed all in baggy black clothes. And she was walking down the hallway, and she was wearing a hat that reminded me of a witch's hat. And as she approached, I said, "Hi, how are you?" And she stopped. And she gave me this look that said, "Just leave me the heck alone," and continued down to catch up with the rest of her friends. Well, I followed them and I caught up with the friends, and we were at the Magic Castle in Hollywood, which is a private club for magicians and their guests. And I was like, "Hey guys, you having a good time?" They're like, "Oh my God, this place is amazing." And I said, "Yeah, but have you seen any really good close-up magic?" And they shrugged their shoulders. And I said, "Come on, let's go." And we went over to a table in the corner, which had green felt on it, 6 chairs. And I put Darren on my right. And I could tell that she didn't want to be there, that she didn't want to be
Mm.
in public. She was hiding something, and I didn't know what it was. But my
Mm.
goal for that 30-minute performance was to get Darren to smile. That was it. So I made every illusion about her. Everything she did made the magic happen. And within minutes, all of a sudden, she sat up straight and she removed that funny looking hat and she started smiling and her eyes started to dance. And I could tell whatever baggage she brought with her that night was no longer in the front of her mind. It was gone. And I did my show. And normally audiences will applaud and they'll thank you and they'll move on. But these guys wanted more. So I shared the story about how I hid from life cameras and mirrors for 12 years because I didn't feel comfortable in my own skin. I didn't like my reflection. And if I didn't like it, how was anyone else going to like it?
Mm.
And that all changed August 3rd, 2017 at 9:41 p.m.
Mhm.
I mustered the courage. I went to my first magic convention in Las Vegas, Magic Live, and it
Mhm.
was amongst the greatest minds in magic. And I said, darn it, John, I want to remember these moments. I'm going to take pictures with these great mentors in magic. And I did. And the reason I know the exact date and time is that's the date and time stamp on the first photo I took.
Which was a milestone for you internally to,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then for the rest of the week, I took selfies with all these great magicians. And I got home and I'm uploading the photos from my phone to my computer. And it dawned on me, light bulb moment. If these great minds in magic had no trouble taking a picture with me, what was my hang up? What was my problem? And that's when I realized that I could be whoever I chose to be. I didn't have to be defined by my facial paralysis. Let me finish the story and I'll let
Okay.
you come to your next thought. So I shared that story with the group, especially Darren, and she stood up and she motioned for me to stand. And she gave me one of these hugs that you don't soon forget. It's like you haven't seen your sister in 20 years kind of hug. And she was holding on for dear life. And after what seemed like minutes was probably only seconds, she stood back. She was crying and she said, John, I need to share something with you. 4 years ago, I had a double mastectomy because I have the BRCA1 gene. And my mom, my aunt, and my sister, they all had their breasts proactively removed. And I was the last in the family to do that. And all of a sudden now I'm sitting here at a place I had no intention of going to. I wanted to just stay and watch TV. And all of a sudden I watched your magic and I was engaged. But then I heard your story. And it made me understand for the first time how I've been hiding since my surgery. And with her friends and I as witnesses, she made herself a promise that that would be the last night she would hide. And I fell back on my chair, totally overwhelmed because I had no idea I would touch someone on such a level. And that's when I realized what my true calling was, is to use my adversity to empower other people to get out of their way, to celebrate their differences and show up as who they are, not what they look like.
Bravo.
And I do that almost every day of my life. In my resilience empowerment coach, in my speaking, in my magic performing, I show up. I'm not scared to be out in public. And if someone doesn't want to look at me, they don't have to look at me. They
Well, what
could.
I was going to say to you is I think that you have broken free of the status quo. Like you don't have to play by those rules anymore. You're free of that.
Well, I was always a rule bender in life in general. But yeah, I mean, I played by my own set of rules.
Yeah. So I think on one hand, um, you're not caged in by the status quo because if you say to yourself, well, I can't even play that game anyways, fantastic, you're free to create your own rules, like you said. And then the second thing I was just thinking about is I would imagine people are not intimidated by you, and then therefore they let their guard down, like when you were having selfies taken, all the photos in Las Vegas, for instance, like if you stepped into an elevator, um, I don't know if somebody would compete with you.
All right, you brought up when we're jumping around, but that's fine. So there were many nights where I would sit down at a table, and I would attract people to come over to the table and sit down, and I would perform magic. And the Magic Castle is a place where everybody has to dress up, and women love it because they can wear their best outfits, whatever, right? And so women would come over and they'd sit down, but they didn't know what to make of me. They see this overweight, balding guy with screwed up face. So, they're there to have a good time. I'm going to present some magic. They're going to be, you know, they're going to experiment, experience it, right? But their body language is one of, their arms are crossed and their legs are crossed and they're leaning back and they've got a grin, but not a really real, authentic smile on their face. And then I start my show, and I look at all these women, and I see this wall that women in today's society are forced to put up to protect themselves against any people who are going to be taking advantage of them, no matter what it is, sexually, whatever. But they
Hmm.
put this wall up and it's automatic. It just goes up. And as I start being myself and I start telling my story and performing amazing magic, all of a sudden I start to see these walls start to drop. And their arms go to their side and their legs, they plant their feet on the floor. And then they start leaning in. And by the end of the show, they're asking permission to hug me. And that happened once. I was like, well, that's a fluke. But that would happen over and over and over again. So a couple of the women that I actually had a real connection with, I asked if I could call them and talk to them a day or two later about what was going through their mind, what was going through their body when all of a sudden they went from, I don't know about this guy, to,
Yeah, guarded.
oh, I want to give you a hug so bad I can taste it. And I talked to like three or four women. And after our 45-minute call, it came down. I said, they didn't really know how to put words to it. And I said, okay, I'm gonna throw something out there and see how it resonates with you. I gave you permission to be vulnerable again. I gave you permission to be feminine again. And the reactions were varied, but most of them were like, yes, that's exactly what it was. Yes. It's just, yeah, again, another superpower of mine.
Yeah, well, I think that you were safe that moment, but also you weren't running game on them, as that expression goes.
No, of course not.
Yeah.
I didn't want to date them. I just wanted to inspire them. I wanted to entertain them. I wanted to befriend them. I wanted to just be an equal, you know?
Ah, that's going to be magnetic, John. You have no idea.
And I don't know what goes through a woman's head, you know? I'd be multimillionaire if I did. Women are from Mars and men are from Venus or which backwards, I don't remember. But, we don't really know what women are thinking. But in those moments, I knew exactly what they were thinking. And to be able to give such a precious gift to someone, even for 20 or 30 minutes, to allow them to just be vulnerable and let their feminine side take over and be loving. And kissing and loving and hugging are a woman's way of showing that they care for somebody.
To nurture another.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the greatest gifts I think for women is just to be nice, but they sometimes have lost that today's day and age,
Yeah.
that it is a strength to be nice. It's not weakness to be nice.
Yeah.
That's what the world needs the
Right.
most sometimes from women is just to be nurturing.
I think it's more than nice. Nice is nice is a nice term, but authentic is it
Hmm.
be themselves,
Hmm.
you know? Nice just doesn't cut it for me. Authentic, be themselves. That's really what it's all about.
So let me transition for a moment over to your TED Talk that was deeply personal as well as powerful. And I think you have to your right, the editor's picks 30 TED Talks that have made an impact this century, right onto your
Yeah, it was
side.
an article that was written. I was included, my TED Talk was included in a Los Angeles magazine article about TED Talks.
Wonderful, wonderful. So,
Yeah.
what did sharing your story on such a public platform unlock for you emotionally, mentally, and or spiritually?
It helped define my mission. It helped define who I was. And to perform my TED Talk, to deliver my TED Talk, even though it was only 12 or 13 minutes, in front of 1,000 people and get a standing ovation and then walk out in the lobby and there'd be a line of people waiting for 10, 15, 20 minutes just to come and give me a hug, shake my hand and say thank you. You know, that was so fulfilling.
Mhm.
You know, if my lessons of how to treat people who are different with respect and compassion changed one person's behavior, I did my job. Because after all, life is about our interactions with others, friends, family, lovers, whatever. And if we can affect change in just one person, the world will be a better place.
Mhm. I agree. I agree. And it takes positive role models and leaders to speak on subjects that are what I call the pink elephant in the room. So
Yeah.
that other people go, oh, okay, okay, that's how I handle and address that. Because sometimes people don't know and then they just shut down. And then we equate that silence with that maybe they don't like us or, unconscious bias, but maybe they just don't even know how to behave or act. Like they just don't know. No one's taught them, no one's shown them.
You know, I talk about in my coaching a lot, I talk about dreaming. You know, as kids, we're with whoever raised us, our parents or grandparents, whatever, foster parents, it doesn't matter. And they'll have an adult friend come over for dinner or to the house, whatever. And what's the first thing that adult says to you as a kid? Hi, Angelina, what do you want to be when you grow up? And as a boy, I was like, I want to be a policeman. No, wait, I want to be an astronaut. No, I want to be a rock star. And then I run in our room and grab two rulers and start banging on stuff like I'm playing a drum set. And then start playing my air guitar. And now I'm in a world of make-believe. And everything is possible. That's why I love magic so much. Because magic makes the impossible possible. Remember, impossible is two words. I'm possible. And so you go into this land of make-believe and you can be there for hours. And then we grow up, and we get educated and we go out and we get a job and that turns into a career and we start a family and all of a sudden we stop dreaming. You know, so many times I'll be walking with a friend of mine and I'll say, "Hey, how are you doing?" They go, "Living the dream." And my stock answer is, "Yeah, but is it your dream you're living or somebody else's?" And sometimes they actually stop in their tracks. I'm like, "Holy crap, I'm living my mom's dream. I'm living my wife or girlfriend's dream, but I'm not living my dream." So we do dreaming exercises where there are no limits on you. We shed all the limiting beliefs. And it's amazing where people can go and where they truly want to be. And then we put plans together. Okay, how do we get there? Let's talk about what steps you need to take to get to that place of living every day with joy. Because that's the meaning of life. No matter if you're spiritual, religious, whatever, it's meaning of life to me is filling every day with as much joy as you can fit.
You know what I wonder unlocked regarding your TED Talk is the leader in you.
I've always been a leader.
Okay.
Okay. I don't know, I was born a leader. You know,
Okay.
in high school and college. Um, I just, again, I never asked for permission to do stuff.
Ah.
So I would do it. And people would say, "Oh, John's doing something cool. Let me follow him." And that's really what allowed me to be a leader. I didn't let limitations affect my forward momentum, period. I'll give you a good example. So, I told you I spent 11, 12 years learning how not to hide my face, right? And then what happened in March 2020? The pandemic hit. And now covering your face with a mask became not only politically correct, but government mandated. And I spent 12 years learning how not to hide my face. So I went online and I found a company that would print things on face masks. And I sent a picture of the lower half of my face. And they printed me masks with my face on it the way it is today. And I would wear them in public, and strangers would look at it and not understand it, would just discount it. But friends and family and people who knew me would do a double take, and they would immediately get my point is I choose not to hide my face, even through a global pandemic. That's, in my opinion, the definition of a leader, stepping out from the crowd and being who I want to be, who I want other people to see me as. And if they're inspired by that, I'm happy as heck.
Yeah, and happiness comes in all forms.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It makes you challenge your choices.
Magic is often about illusion and perception. How has your physical transformation changed your relationship with performance, identity, and what it means to truly, quote, see someone?
You know, when I started performing, I made the magic about myself. Look what I can
Mm,
do. Look what I can do. I can, pull four aces out of the deck without trying or whatever the illusion. And I had a magician friend of mine who was watching me, and he pulled me aside. He said, John, I love your magic, but do you have to make it just about you?
mm.
And the light bulb went off. And from that moment, I changed my whole idea of performing magic. And I started making it about the spectator, making it about the other person. I just became the conduit to make the magic happen. But it was you, the spectator, the audience member, who actually made the magic happen. Magic happens in the mind of the audience. Just like the old saying, if a tree falls in a forest and no one's there to hear it, does it make any noise? Magic in a vacuum isn't really magic. Magic is the heightened sense of awe and wonder, where you're totally laser focused and your senses are heightened because you saw something that your eyes saw that your brain didn't understand. And you don't really know what to make of it. Otherwise, you want more. You want
Mm.
more of those experiences. There's magic all around us. You go to the beach, you look at the waves, you look at the sunrise or sunset, you look at the mountains, wherever, there's magic all around us. And we're so laser focused on our careers or our family or whatever,
Survival.
we don't take time to just take a deep breath and take a wonder about where we are and our surroundings and all the nature and the animals and the other people in our lives.
Yeah. So perhaps what you saw then in others is that they want to be in amazement and awe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's belief that everything is possible. There are no
Yeah.
limitations. When you're in awe, when you're in a state of awe and wonder, there are no limitations.
Mm.
Magic defies logic. And that's why I love it so much because it makes people, it brings them centered. It allows them to be completely laser focused, 100% present.
I think there's something to it regarding innocence, regarding that wonder, just like the little boy in the restaurant. It was a moment of innocence.
Yeah,
Yeah, and wonder.
he hadn't been jaded yet, you know?
Yeah.
He hadn't adopted his limiting belief system.
Well, or even people, adults, that they can take off their jaded guard for a moment, like when you mentioned the women on the front row and them being guarded in their body language, I think it's for a moment they could just put down the jaded mask and kind of
Yeah,
return to the land of innocence.
exactly. It's going to that place of wonder and dreaming, imagining what life could be, what they want life to be for themselves, how they want to show up in the world, who they want to attract to them.
Yeah. Before I move on to the next question, there was this Mercedes-Benz ad so many years ago, and it showed a brain, and on one half of the brain, I don't remember if it was the right or the left side, it showed images, and they were all gray, black, and white. And then on the other hemisphere, it was in color. Do you know the ad campaign?
Yeah, I did it.
Yeah. And so I'm almost thinking that it's like this place of the part of us that is not analytical. Like when you talk about magic defying logic, it's the part where we just want to play. And I think about so many successful Hollywood directors, whether it's James Cameron with Avatar or Steven Spielberg with E.T., or I mean, there's so many different, including female directors these days, that go into this place of play. And we wonder, like, what is your 9 to 5 like? And it's probably not 95, 9 to 5 is probably like 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. or something in the entertainment industry. But still, it's this idea of they just get to to play and be in that colorful half of the hemisphere of their brain.
Imagination is a muscle, just like resilience is a muscle.
Hmm.
Exercise it. You need to use it every day, to come up with those. Everybody has strokes of genius, but very few people act upon them.
Yeah. Well, that's where the belief has to come in, the confidence.
Self-confidence, then learning
Yeah.
to love yourself, learning how to believe that things are impossible. Excuse me, possible. That nothing is impossible until you try it. And then resilience is about, okay, that didn't work. Let me look at it through a different lens. Let me try it from a different angle until you figure it out.
Hmm. You know, I was once told before I go on to the next question that sometimes the children that weren't popular growing up do better in life later on because they had to get back up again and try again, and it didn't come easy for them.
I was bullied as a kid. I remember we lived on a street and there were two neighborhood kids that were 2 or 3 years older than me, and I would go out to play or ride my bike, and they would see me out there, and they would just want to taunt me by chasing me. And of course, I would run because they were chasing me, and I would run inside and hide, and they'd laugh and then go and play. And I remember one Saturday morning, my dad came in and said, John, we're moving. We bought a new house. I'm like 9 years old. And so I was like, okay, all right, I'm going to stand up. And I went outside and started riding my bike. And like clockwork, the two kids came out and they started running. And I stood my ground. I knew if I was going to take a beating, it would be one beating. And all of a sudden, the kids were like shocked. And they literally almost ran me over because they expected me to run, not stand my ground. I remember one turned to the other and said, well, this isn't any fun anymore, and walked away. And I remember going inside and sitting down for lunch with my folks and saying, why didn't I do that 3 years ago when the bullying started? You just got to stand your ground sometimes and you got to take a whipping because you showing up is what matters. You standing up and just not being afraid. And even if you're afraid, doing it anyway. That's what risks taking is all about. We're all scared. We're all scared of failure. We're all scared, but the more you take risks, the easier it comes. In my oh,
And you felt like you didn't sell out that moment. Yep, go ahead. Please hold up your book.
okay, I'm going to hold on my book. If you guys get to the end of the podcast, I will give you a link to download a PDF version uh, Playing the Hand You Are Dealt, my best-selling book. So anyway, I talk about my tripod theory, and it's named after an experience I had in college. I was a theater major, and um, I was hired as the prop manager for a children's theater show, children's theater show, and it was a vintage show, period show. So I had to build a stand for a pot of soup. Sounds simple, but I remember standing in the scene shop with all the raw materials and just was staring at them. I didn't know what to do first, so I was frozen. And my instructor, his name was Jerry Abbott, and he was from Kentucky, Paducah, Kentucky. And he always wore suspenders and had a cigar hanging out of his mouth, and his hair was never combed. And he came over and he said, "Boy, what are you doing? I didn't take you to raise." That was his famous saying. I said, "Jerry, I'm having trouble getting started. I don't know, I don't know how to do this." And he said, "John, come on, take four pieces of wood. Okay, tie a rope around the top. Okay, hang a hook. Tie another rope around the feet so it'll splay out. Here, you built a tripod. Get out of your head." And in 5 minutes, I had built that tripod. And then I realized that every time I would run up against a challenge that I didn't know what to do because I was stuck in that uh, feeling or that being lost, I would just close my eyes and say tripod. And what would happen? I talk about triggers. Most people think of triggers as negative. I use the word tripod because it's a positive trigger for me. So when I say tripod to myself, all of those feelings of accomplishment that I got when I actually built that damn tripod and looked back and said, hey, that wasn't so hard after all. Those feelings of self-worth, that confidence that I had, I attached to the word tripod. And so I'm able to invoke those feelings, which empower me whenever I'm up against a challenge. It it's an amazing way of just taking action. Um, so that's one of the concepts I talk about in the book, but there are many more. Just I get a thrill about helping people get out of their own way, and achieve their dreams. Start dreaming and then achieve them, of course.
Yeah, to be alive, to be fully alive and not just existing.
Yeah, and we all take time off. Sometimes we just need to sit on the couch and watch mindless TV and vegetate. It's fun.
Yeah.
But
So
making that a habit, no.
let me circle back for a moment regarding the theme of confidence as well as self-worth. So when the mirror no longer reflects who you once were, how did and do you or did you rebuild a sense of self and perhaps more importantly, a sense of worth?
My self-worth became stronger when I would be with others and I would share my authentic story and the challenges I went through and how I overcame them. Because that empowered others to follow my example and find their own answers, their own solutions to whatever was troubling them. And to see their transformation. Like
Mm-hmm.
when I coach people, usually on our first session, I normally kind of get a sense of what they're hiding from.
Mm.
Okay. But my style is to ask inquiring, open-ended questions to get my clients to discover those limiting beliefs on their own. I can tell you what I think your limiting belief is, and that doesn't really help anything. But if I can lead you down a path and keep you from going off, the path until all of a sudden you have your light bulb moment
Mm.
and you come to terms, whatever that thing is in your past. Usually it's something in your past. I had one of my first coaching clients. She wanted to start her own business, but she didn't know how to do it. And so I would call her and I'd say, okay, where's the website? Well, I don't know what to call my coaching progress, and I don't know what to do this. And so I bought all these books, and I'm going to take this other course. And I said, you are enough. Yeah, I know, but I don't really know what to do it. So finally, I said, tell me a little bit about how you grew up. Well, I grew up, I had parents, and my mom left, and I lived with my dad. And then on my 18th birthday, my dad said, okay, you need to go move out. I've raised you, and you're 18, you're an adult, and you need to go out and fend for yourself. And she wasn't ready to do that.
I like that line of demarcation because sometimes people are prepared, and other times there's this artificial like line, and parents just like push the children out of the nest.
Yeah, and that's exactly what he did to her. And so she went and she needed to make some money quickly. And so she became a topless dancer
Hmm.
because it brought in lots of money.
Hmm.
And she was able to get in her own apartment and start her life and was making money. And, she wasn't prostituting herself.
And she didn't have to go to the gym for 30 minutes every night.
That's right.
But bump.
But she said, she told her dad. Her dad said, so what are you doing now? I see you have this great new apartment. What's going on? And she said, well, I'm topless dancing.
Hmm.
Dad said, yeah, that's what I thought you'd probably do. Right. And she said it matter of fact. And I said, wait, stop. Hold your horses. Say that again. Yeah, he said, that's what I thought you'd probably do. And I went, are you hearing yourself? You're wondering why you can't take action, why you can't have any kind of self-confidence because your dad said those words to you, eroded your self-confidence, who you are as a human being, who you are as a woman. Are you kidding me? Before your dad passes away, you need to give him a call and tell him, Dad, I love you, but that was not okay.
Yeah,
That affected my life significantly.
he was probably unhappy, the dad, because they say when men are unhappy, they make the women around them feel as if there's everything wrong with them. So her dad was probably just unhappy because who says that stuff?
Yeah. So the next session, I said, and? And she said, I called my dad. I told him exactly what you said I should tell him. And he started crying because he didn't remember ever saying that to me.
Mm.
And I told him how much that had hurt, how much that had eroded who I was. Oh, and by the way, I bought my website. That was what it took to get her to take action, to feel confident. Boy, what a win that was for both of us.
Yeah.
But she had to get there on her own.
I,
I
I think it
I
was
led
also,
her there.
yeah, I think it was wonderful that you also helped um, see herself, to allow to see herself from a new perspective. That was not
Yeah. But
like,
I mean, coaching is you got to build that rapport. It takes a
yeah,
couple sessions.
because her dad could have said, wow, check you out. You're an entrepreneur and there were so many different responses her dad could
Right.
have,
Yeah.
yeah. Like, well, way to think quickly on your feet. Or and just I mean, there's okay, all right. Legacy is often thought of as what we leave behind, death and taxes, and on and on. Your story speaks to the legacy that we can live every day. How do you define legacy in your words compared to that of the dictionary after all you have faced and overcome?
Legacy is showing up how you want to show up and being generous,
Mm.
helping others. You get so much joy from helping someone else. Now with social media and so prevalent, people, friends on Facebook or whatever, they will post something. And you read that and you go, it's not like them. And then you doom scroll. You keep on scrolling to another page. Not me. I'd stop. I'd pick up the phone and I call them and I say, I saw your post about whatever it was. What's going on? Let's talk about that. People reach out for help
Mm.
in the strangest ways. And there's sometimes just little signs. They're little hints of being in distress. It can be just a simple post or sharing a piece of music that lyrics are very depressing or about suicide or about death or about whatever. And that's people's way of coping, of reaching out for help without saying, all right, I need therapy. Oh, I need coaching. I need to talk to somebody. So being present and recognizing that and being willing to bring that up to someone, knowing that the possible outcome is that they never talk to you again, and being willing to give up that friendship, to just reach out and be honest with them and say, "Hey, I think there's something going on, and I want to hear about it."
Yeah. Sorry, I just had to plug the MacBook in. Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a power to being seen. Being seen is also very vulnerable at times, but I think it's the thing that people want the most. And so, when I think about how you define legacy, I think it's being generous with your heart to notice them, to see them beyond the mask.
Yes,
Yeah.
all sorts of metaphors there.
Yeah, but don't bump. Yeah. Because you have done the inner work, and a part of it is that you could say, well, I didn't have a choice to, and I could say back to you, but look at how much better you are because now you've grown these muscles to be able to reach across the aisle to someone else who is suffering silently or loudly.
The question that I get asked a lot. Okay, if you could go back to right before your surgery and make the tumor disappear and not have any of the drama and the adversity, would you go back to that and change the way it was? And my answer is I wouldn't change a moment because that made me who I am. That has helped me help so many people, help people who I haven't even met. When Alex Trebek came out with his cancer diagnosis on national television, that took strength to go on national television at the end of the show and say, guys, I'm fighting the battle of my life. Please send prayers, send positive thoughts. I'm going to beat this thing. I reached out and found his daughter, Nikki. And I had helped people who had been going through cancer and look at their lives through a different lens. So I found Nikki and I said, I'm sorry, Nikki. I know I'm being forward, but I need to perform for your dad. And I invited her and her family to come to the castle, and they were like, no, he doesn't want to be in public. But we're having a 75th birthday party, and we don't have any entertainment. So if you want to come and do a show, and I said, yeah. So I spent the next 2 months designing my unique show just for Alex Trebek with a Jeopardy theme and whatever. And if you read the book, and there's QR codes that'll take you to an area on my website where there are actually some videos of me performing for Alex Trebek, and he was a little boy. He was like, I want to know how this stuff works. He was very frustrated in a nice way. And there was a time where I made his daughter's signed card disappear. And I opened my wallet and there's a sealed envelope. And I tore out the envelope and I handed it to his daughter. And Alex grabs it as he helps hand it to his daughter. And he says, if my daughter's signed eight of hearts is in that envelope, I'm gonna kick the crap out of you. And of course, she pulls out and shows the eight of hearts, and he starts literally beating me with his fist in a joyful, kidding way. But he was like, "How did you do that?" And after the 45-minute show, he and I went off to another. We sat there. I shared with him that I had reached out to his family because I was so touched by his courage of being honest with his fans, millions of fans, about what he was going to go through and asking for their love and support. And that was what was going to get him through that time. And I said, well, I heard your message and I want to do what I could do to help thank you. I venture to say that people probably don't say thank you to you for your life's work, do they? And he shook his head and he started getting emotional. And he said, no, no one ever really says thank you for the 40 years of hosting Jeopardy and all the work that went into it, learning all these answers and just showing up. He was one of these celebrities above reproach, unlike the Matt Lauers of the world. He really showed up and showed his experience. And I said, I just wanted to say thank you. And we embraced and, it was just a great moment. And again, if I hadn't reached out to him and reached out to his daughter and said, not I want, I need to reform for your dad. It's a moral imperative for me. I didn't give her the option to say no because she saw something and it was just over the phone.
Well, I think you matched his courage
Yeah,
when you saw him.
it was one of the proudest moments of my life to be able to say thank you to a legend. That's it was one of those lifetime experiences that you'll always remember. And you look back, and when you're feeling down, they'll reinvigorate you and they'll keep you moving forward. Yeah.
What would you say to someone who is battling visible or invisible scars today?
Who the heck cares? They don't define you.
Hmm. Okay.
Scars are only skin deep, you know. You have the power to overcome whatever trauma has gone on in your life, to come to terms with it. By all means, get help from a friend, from a professional, from a coach, from a family member. Get that guidance. We are on this world, this earth, not to be alone.
Hmm. The connection is important.
Oh, my connection is everything.
Yeah.
Connection is everything. And you ask a friend for some guidance and you're really honest about it, they're going to show up. And if they don't, they shouldn't be a friend of yours. You shouldn't waste your time on them if they're so self-centered that they can't take a half hour out of their life to listen and be supportive and give you a hug and root you on, become your cheerleader.
If there is someone today who is in a place of pain, what would you say to them to turn their pain into purpose as you have?
Being different is your biggest superpower. I believe that with all my heart, and everything I do leads to, and feed your heart with your art.
Hmm.
Let whatever your passions are, whatever you're passionate about, come out and let other people see those passions because they will be attracted to you. They will go, wow, he has a strength. I want some of that. I want to drink his Kool-Aid. You know,
Well, I think that when we can live for something bigger than ourselves, then
yeah.
it changes the energy around a person.
You talk about legacy. You know, we are on this earth for a very short time. And again, whether or not you feel like you're going to go to heaven or hell or whatever your religious beliefs aside, what truly matters is how you show up in this universe, in this world, not waiting for things to happen to you. Things don't happen to you.
They happen for you.
Hey, thank you for taking the words out of my mouth. Things happen for you.
When we become at peace with things that happen for us.
Yeah, exactly. How did my Kool-Aid taste? Was it nice and sweet? It's so true, though. Things happen for us. It's a point of view. It's a frame of mind. It's a mindset. It's a lesson that we all learn and we grow from. Not everybody has, no, people don't have a perfect life, even though from afar it may look like they do. Money isn't everything. Fame isn't everything. Being self-centered in yourself and understanding who you are and what you want to contribute to the world, that's what matters. That's what creates a legacy, you know? The number of people you touch, that's how you keep score. It's not how much money you have in the bank. It's not how many friends you have on Facebook. It's not how many followers you have on Instagram. It's how many people you touch and get them to realize that there's more to life than just hiding.
Yeah. Has your definition of beauty or success evolved through this experience? And if so, how do you now measure a life well lived?
Boy, um, again, beauty to me is skin deep. I mean, you first look at someone, you go, wow, they're hot, they're attractive. But until you have a conversation with them to know if you have similar goals or similar things in interest, if when I date, I'm looking for someone who has a brain, has an opinion, is open to change, is open to hearing my opinion,
Mm.
um, open to be vulnerable. That's what, relationships are about. I talk about my parents. My parents lived a great married life. I grew up at a rich private school, and probably 60, 70% of the kids were from broken homes.
Mm.
And, my mom wore the pants in the family.
Because
Anything
your
my
dad was
mom
too
wanted,
busy working?
no.
Mm.
Anything my mom wanted, my dad got for her. And it was out of love for her.
Mm.
I remember as they would every Sunday they loved football. Then on the weekends they would sit on the couch and they would watch football. And they would have a friendly wager, a $20 bet on whoever was going to win the game, right?
There are two competitive attorneys. Keep going.
And I remember often my mom would say, "All right, Harold, I want Dallas." I would see my dad's face and he'd take a deep breath and he'd puff out his cheeks. All right, how many points do I get? You know, it was, he was going to give my mom what she wanted. She wanted to bet on Dallas, even though my dad really wanted Dallas. But he kind of leveled the playing field a little bit by saying, okay, well, how many points will you give me? Let's make it a fair fight, at least. Unless it was University of Michigan, because that was my dad's alma mater. And my mom knew not to screw with the University of Michigan, that was going to be my dad's team. There were boundaries. There were my boundaries that my mom would not cross. I don't know why I'm bringing up this story, but I'm going to, and you can edit it out if you, um, you know, I didn't understand my mom. My mom would say, John, clean your room. And I would say, why? And her answer was not a logical one. It was an emotional one. Because I damn told you to. And she would scream it at me, and I was emotional. And I would go in my room and sulk because my mom scolded me. And my dad would come in and rub my back and calm me down and say, your mom really loves you. She just doesn't have the skills to control her temper. And sometimes she lashes out, but it's not for the lack of loving you. It's just who she is, and you just need to accept that she loves you unconditionally, and that's really what matters. And my dad passed away in 2017 from dementia, and it was a hard. That's one thing I help people, caregivers of people who are going through dementia, help them manage that as long as they can. Um, but I remember I was out to dinner with my mom, and there was an awkward silence. We would talk multiple. We were really close. We would talk multiple times a day. But there was this awkward silence. And my mom says, John, I got something to tell you. And I stopped eating. I put down my fork and I said, okay, what, Mom? She said, I was sexually attacked in college and I never told a soul.
Maybe that was the rage that was pent up. Keep
I
going.
never told my mom or dad. I never told my best friend. And I certainly never told your father. And when I picked my jaw off the ground, I said, Mom, that answers so many questions about how you deal with relationships, especially with men. And my only wish is that you had told me years ago. And from that time till her death, which unfortunately was only a year later, our relationship turned 180 degrees. And I saw her for who she really was and that pain that she was able to unmask after living it for 50 plus years, 60 years. She lived with that pain and kept it bottled up for that long.
I think you became safe again, like what I was saying
Yeah,
before,
and
like
we never
unconditional.
talked about it again.
Yeah.
Never talked about it. But deep down, she knew that she was not going to go to the grave with it. She had
Mm.
told the person who was most important to her in her life, her son. I'm crying.
Thank you for sharing that.
You
Is
know,
she still alive today?
no, she passed.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
She, yeah, she passed away in 2018, end of 18. So
Thank you for sharing that.
yeah, it's emotional because it's I had animosity towards my mom.
But now you know the true story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it changed everything. It allowed me to be much more patient with her. I would battle with her. I'm a creative problem solver. That's who I am. That's what I do in my theater career, in my magic, in my speaking, and my coaching. I look at problems as an opportunity to find solutions. And my mom really wanted to be able to keep my dad at home during his disease, during his dementia decline. And I was like, okay, Mom, this is what you need to do. When your when your husband starts going off in a left field, you need to enter his reality instead of forcing him back into yours.
Mm.
My dad would go off the rails and he would start making stuff up. Oh my God, that's exciting, Dad. Tell me more. Whatever. I knew it was make believe. I knew it was just a fantasy of his. But my mom, no, my mom was, Harold, stop that. Stop that. You're lying to yourself or whatever. And that would irritate my dad. That would get my dad uptight to the point where he got so physically frustrated he would lash out physically towards my mom. And my dad had never raised a hand to my mom. But her failure to accept him as who he had become and not to try to force him back into the mold that he was, but love him unconditionally was just so hard to watch. It was just, you gotta learn how to enter their reality.
Yeah. I think that's the muscle and power of imagination. Like
Yeah.
you can dance within the realm of imagination and the capacity for imagination and know that it is safe to play in the world of imagination, then, like you had said, you can go and meet someone where they are at. And if they want to talk about dragons and unicorns or whatever it is that they want to talk about, you could say, "Oh, and what color was the dragon?"
Yeah. Enter the reality.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Have some fun there, you know?
So let me bring up vulnerability as well as resilience. In your opinion, how can embracing our wounds rather than hiding them lead to deeper human connection as well as legacy?
Well, I think I've talked about that for the last hour and a half.
I'm
Uh,
circling the wagons.
I mean, I think just accepting, you know, the Lord's Prayer, accept the things that you cannot change,
Mhm.
you know, change what you can and accept the things you can't change is is a lesson we all need to live by. Learning how to be resilient, learning how to live and be proud of yourself and stand up for what you believe in. And, especially in today's political climate, you know, you got to take a stand, period. There's no, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, no matter what side of the fence you're on.
So I often say that one's core values are like the legs of a chair. What do you think your top 3 to 4 core values are?
Um, Being generous, being authentic, and being a great listener.
Mm, okay. If you were to set aside a weekend or two a month for the rest of this year to design your legacy hardcover coffee table book to be featured at the Magic Castle or in your living room, what would, what images, stories, etc., would fill its pages?
They're all right here.
Okay, okay, wonderful. Before you share the website that's also above your head right now, in the for those
Yep.
that are looking in video,
JohnKippen.com.
yeah. If you could pass on one magical truth about healing, identity, purpose to future generations, what would it be?
Life is an adventure, and
Mm,
treat it like it's an adventure.
okay, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to circle back to the intention that we set at the beginning of today's conversation, which was, what if we could help you get out of your own way, especially after adversity, for the design of your legacy? And I think we have fulfilled that business promise today. There were so many good points that you had brought up regarding learning to love yourself despite any baggage and overcoming this limiting belief you had once said, earlier in today's conversation about, I wasn't lovable. And this idea about, how to no longer hide from life. Um, you spoke also about how magic defies logic. And I almost think that what you went through, it's almost like you had to move around the furniture afterwards, those 12 years, but you did it. And it's kind of like magic in some ways because like when you pull out the card from the wallet, it's like kind of like moving matter around, moving energy around. So I'm seeing all these parallels between your real life and then the the entertainment that you do on stage, but like you had said, magic is all around us.
Life is a puzzle. And if you buy into the fact that life's a puzzle and enjoy playing the game, you win.
Yeah. Any closing thoughts before I read my paragraph?
I've done a lot of podcasts, and this is by far my favorite.
Thank you.
No, seriously, because you did your research and you asked questions that I had to think about. And I was trying to be as articulate, but you brought me to tears a couple times. You touched my heart with your care and your concern and wanting to empower me to share my messages, you know, to empower me to help others who are listening to this podcast who might want to reach out to me for some coaching or just to say hi or just to say thank you, or whatever. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning, is knowing that I helped someone else and you allowing me to share my messages, who I am, who I have become. Great gift you gave me today. And next Friday, you know what next Friday is? My
I think
birthday.
it's the 4th of July or something. No,
It's my
July
birthday.
3rd.
No, next Friday is my birthday, July 4th.
Oh, okay.
I was born on Independence Day.
Happy birthday,
And
early.
you just gave me an amazing gift with this interview. And
My
I think
pleasure.
that
Thank you.
it's been amazing.
Okay. And on that note, in closing, I'm Angelina Carleton, the hostess of the Design Your Legacy podcast, as well as the founder to Legacy Planning, a boutique advisory firm based out of Beverly Hills, California, USA, but international in those I get to consult. I hope to dive deep into subjects that can help a person define, develop, and execute their legacy, and continue to scour the landscape for those who can be great resources to every dimension of your legacy. For many listeners and viewers, there can never be enough education and preparation in the moot or moat around your castle. Whether you find yourself in new wealth or generational wealth, may the content on this channel be an anchor in any storms ahead. We do our best to provide original content for your intellectual and emotional curiosity. If you're tuning in on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube, etc., please remember to rate and review, share with your family and friends. And if you feel so inclined, send an email to either John or myself and let us know your thoughts and feelings about today's episode. So
And to
thank you.
download the copy of my book, go to johnkippen.com/free gift.
Absolutely. And so thank you so much for joining. And thank you, John, for speaking into your legacy.